Chicago Syndicate, not just the most famous, but, perhaps, the most atypical Italian-American criminal group. It is Chicago and not New York became the symbol of gangsterism. Glorified this city, first of all, Al Capone. For many he will forever be gangster number one. So they will be. A surprise to learn that not only is he not the greatest boss in the history of the American Mafia, but not the most prominent of the leaders of Chicago. Individual personality traits, charm, charisma, and a unique period, the heyday of bootlegging, in which he had a chance to rule, made him an icon of the Mafia. What are the characteristics of the Chicago Syndicate? Let's start with the title syndicate and not family. And it reflects the essence of the organization. The Chicago outfit was not like other mafia families that were associations of compatriots from the Italian ghetto, who brought with them the traditions of the mafia. The Chicago outfit has grown on the basis of already existing, powerful organizations that did not have the traditional mafia is irrelevant. It was a large network of brothels under the auspices of the corrupt politicians, the Irish, and it was headed by the Sicilian Big Jim Colosimo marrying madam of the largest whorehouse. I must say that at that time it was a large and complex business type of bootlegging. The great mass of immigrants arriving in the second half of 19 beginning of XX centuries was almost the only one of the men, bachelors or married men who left families across the ocean, until they settled in a new place. So sharply, abruptly, increased the demand for prostitutes. It was a terrible and dirty business of an entire era, which is now rarely remembered. Hands is not enough, and girls were abducted off the streets. They were held for weeks in barracks, where they were constantly raped, yet did not break their will. To avoid being recognized relatives and friends, they were constantly transported from city to city. A new notion: the white slaves. This business demanded hierarchy, separation of duties, bribery of police and politicians. In Chicago's main criminal family of the city will grow out of this evil empire. Another uncharacteristic trait for the Mafia at first, the syndicate was a victim, not a predator. Income empire Jim Colosimo coveted ransomware from the Black Hand, by the way, that they are in other cities became the Mafia. To protect them from Colosimo was discharged from New York tough guy, his nephew Johnny the Fox Torrio, who, in turn, later invited Al Capone. The Chicago outfit was not originally a clan of the Sicilians. Al Capone and one of his successors, Paul Ricca, was Neapolitanum, but this difference then it was very important. In addition, an integral part of the syndicate, not the external partners, were gangs of Jewish and Irish origin. Some of them held important positions in the leadership, such as Murray the Camel, Hamphris, a Welshman, Gus Alex, the Greek, Joe Greasy Thumb Guzik, and Laziness Patrick, the Jews. Syndicate is the union means. Now, the Chicago outfit was originally not whole clan, linked by common origins and traditions in a union of several constituent parts. Johnny Torrio earlier, in the early 20s, began to show the desire to unite the criminals, and the number of gangs non-Italian origin, went to cooperate with the syndicate, was during the 20 IES 30 IES consumed. Johnny Torrio is generally underestimated, and stands in the shadow of his pupil Al Capone. But the greatness of this gangster that he was the mastermind behind the creation of the national crime syndicate that united all the gangsters in the USA, the idea which in practice was implemented by Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. Gradually, the Chicago outfit became more and more of a typical Mafia family. The old leaders of the Neapolitan, Jewish and Irish descent, grew old and is gone. And in their stead came the Sicilians. The internal structure and composition of the syndicate has become more homogeneous. The syndicate adopted the traditional Mafia initiation ceremony by pricking the finger and the burning image of the holy only in the late 70s. Before that it was just the novice was invited to the gala dinner together with the people and declared that it is his. According to rumors, in the case of Anthony Spilatro it was even more. Casually he knocked on the door to Tony Accardo, was answered by the boss himself, right in the hallway, and thanked for their good work and declared it a made man. The syndicate have always considered themselves not as family, and like a corporation, simply engaged in illegal business. So he had a slightly different, functional structure. The individual links were more specialized than other families. Some units were engaged in bookmaking, other, street tax, and others gambling machines, etc. Another feature of the Chicago syndicate is a collective leadership. Capone was probably the final boss, which stood at an unattainable height for other subordinates. After his retirement, such a complex and versatile edifice of the syndicate, usually ruled by a group of leaders, this was done also for reasons of safety. Of course, always been the official boss, and was the first among equals, who had the last word. But the power was still spread among several influential figures, in addition to the circuit sometimes include fake boss. Sometimes it was hard to tell where does the power of one, and began the power of another. But in crisis moments all became on the places. Grey Cardinals Chicago has long been Tony Accardo and Paul Ricca. They departed and returned into power. Directly the family managed by other people, but they had the last word. They were the patriarchs, their power was based on authority and not only to posts. Particularly great appears to be Tony Accardo, who set a record for the length of the board and the ability to remain in the shadows. Despite all the problems, the syndicate is now one of the strongest families of the Mafia in the country, competing only with Genovese. In its composition a little made soldier compared to New York, 50 to 70 people, but much more partners, 700, 1200. The syndicate maintains interests outside of Chicago. He lost in Las Vegas, but continues to control casinos on the islands of the Caribbean. In addition, he, unlike the Genovese, is not aware of competition from other families in his hometown. It also controls what is left of the clans of the Cosa Nostra in Milwaukee, Rochester, St. Louis, and has an impact on Detroit. In addition, according to experts, the syndicate and do not require too much labor. He tries to focus on compact, quiet, but highly profitable operations. The syndicate does not seek to collect tribute from every restaurant or push drugs on the streets. Instead, he focused on underground games of chance, in which the victims themselves are happy to participate. We can say that the syndicate had regrouped and uses a different business model. At the time, the Chicago outfit was one of the bloodiest organizations in the country. Of course, the peak of violence occurred in the reign of Capone. According to the Chicago Crime Commission, this is a public organization for the fight against organized crime was created on the money angered by the corruption of businessmen in the days of Capone, from 1919 to 1990 on account of the syndicate 1,106 liquidations. Only in 1926 was 75 liquidations. Once the syndicate was the 7 basic commands. Now there are 3: the northern, southern and western. Syndicate deliberately behaves so modestly and quietly that almost completely disappeared from the radar of law enforcement. Some of the fighters with crime in the late 90s relax and talk that organized crime has become extinct like dinosaurs. And only in the course of such a process as family secrets revealed that the Mafia in Chicago is faring well.